All right, we're back again. This week we are taking the last half of 2 Samuel 3. Let me open 2 Samuel 3. Let me open with a word of prayer. Lord, thank you for this time. I pray for your presence here, for your Holy Spirit's work as I speak. The truth will be spoken. I pray for our ears to listen, to hear, and to see how these things apply as it is, because your word is living and active and sharper than a two-edged sword. So we pray it always affects us in our life, not just intellectually, but also in our life and our character. In Christ's name, amen. All right. So we took the first 16 verses the other week. And so what we're going to do is finish this chapter. So let's start. I'm going to read 17 through 21 first and take it. It says, Now Abner consulted with the elders of Israel, saying, In past times you were seeking for David to be king over you. He says, Now then, do it. For the Lord has spoken of David, saying, By the hand of my servant David, I will save my people Israel from the hands of the Philistines and from the hand of all their enemies. And Abner also spoke in the hearing of Benjamin. And in addition, Abner went to speak in the hearing of David in Hebron, all that seemed good to Israel and to the whole house of Benjamin. Then Abner and 20 men with him came to David at Hebron, and David made a feast for Abner and the men who were with him. And Abner said to David, Let me rise and go and gather all Israel to my lord the king, that they may make a covenant with you, and that you may be king over all that your soul desires. So David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. All right. So there's a lot in this historical narrative that's going on politically. First of all, we see that Abner consults with the elders of the tribes. And he says that we didn't know before this, but he says, you've not been too happy about Ishbosheth. You've raised some questions about him as your king. And of course, I think it's probably because many of these tribal groups probably wanted a much stronger leader because they had not been able to really effectively rid the Philistines from the land and drive them back into the coast where they are. So there was discontent now. Now Abner, I believe also, secondly, saw, quote, the handwriting on the wall. Why do I say that? Go back to chapter 3 and verse 1. Now there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. David grew stronger steadily, and the house of Saul grew weaker continually, right? So we know there's a process going on. Ishbosheth is not being very effective. He's not helping sufficiently the northern tribes. And Abner sees that, Ishbosheth won't make it. And so he decides that he really wants to, quote, be on the winning side. I think also Abner undoubtedly thinks that if he could negotiate this treaty so that David is made king over all of Israel, I think that he assumes that he's going to end up with an important position in David's regime as a result. It doesn't exactly say it, but based on how he acts and what he does, this guy is a power broker. He's been around for a long time. If you remember, back into the days of the earliest days of Saul. Yeah. Obviously David knew him when David was very young in the court of Saul. He knows Abner well. At any rate, so the thing though is that Abner clearly underestimates Joab. And you're going to see he really, really underestimates Joab. Okay. Now, it's interesting that Abner somehow knew about the text, if you want to turn it in 1 Samuel 15. Has he read the scroll? I don't know. It doesn't say how. But in 1 Samuel 15, verse 28, so Samuel said to him, that is to David, the Lord has torn the king, or I'm sorry, to Saul, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to your neighbor who is better than you. Somehow he knew that God had made that decision. And now he is apparently willing to accept that. And he's trying to, again, make a place for himself in the process because he knows he's on the losing team at this point. Now, it's also important here that we see that he talks to the elders of Benjamin. Why is that so important?
Well, Saul's from Benjamin.
Right. If there's any group that's going to be reluctant among all to accept David as king, it's going to be the Benjamites. Okay. But Abner, is well, actually, is Abner a Benjamite? I'm trying to think if he is or not. I have to check on that. At any rate, but obviously he knows the Benjamites. He's had time with the Benjamites. We even remember the story where he and some of his men traveled from the Transjordan area back to the Benjamite area to that well. And then there was this fight between David's men and Joab headed up and Abner's men. Remember that? Well, they were in the Benjamite territory when that was going on. So, at any rate, he obviously brings, I think, an entourage. It says an entourage of elders. Okay, 20 men. It doesn't precisely say it, but I would very much think these are 20 elders from the tribe of Benjamin, because this is the group he really, more than any other, has to win over, or else there's going to be a big problem. Okay, so he brings these 20 men. They come to Hebron. David obviously greets them. David makes a feast for them, shows hospitality to them. Apparently things go well, and everyone's getting along, and apparently is in agreement about a transition of power. And therefore, Abner is sent away, quote, in peace, it says, to negotiate this treaty with other tribal groups and elders of those groups, to make this thing totally happen. Okay? Now, let's read 22 to 27. This is where the plot really thickens. Okay? And behold, the servants of David and Joab came from a raid and brought much spoil with them. But Abner was not with David in Hebron, for he had sent him away, and he had gone in peace. When Joab and all the army that was with him arrived, they told Joab, that is others that were in Hebron, saying, Abner the son of Ner came to the king, and he has sent him away, and he has gone in peace. Now, why would that be significant information to tell Joab?
Because Joab was over him.
That's true, but there's a bigger reason. Who did Abner kill? His brother.
Right.
Abner got blood feud on his brain. Okay, and you're going to see it. He is absolutely determined that he will not let this thing go, and he's going to find a way to get his revenge. This story, this chapter that we're going, is all about revenge.
Now you're talking about Joab.
Joab.
Mm-hmm.
Revenge, revenge, revenge. Okay? So, when Joab and all the army, let's see, I'm sorry, I read that. So 24. And Joab came to the king and said, what have you done? Behold, Abner came to you. Why then have you sent him away, and he has already gone? You know Abner the son of Ner, that he came to deceive you and to learn of your going out and coming in, and to find out all that you are doing. When Joab came out from David, he sent messengers after Abner, and they brought him back from the well of Sirah, but David did not know this. Okay? So when Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside into the middle of the gate to speak with him privately, And there he struck him in the belly, so that he died on account of the blood of Asahel, his brother. Okay. Now, let's go through this. Now, as I said, the plot thickens here. And we see that the dynamics involved in David's personnel and his regime get really messy. And you're going to see even more so how messy they get. All right. It is not likely a coincidence that Joab was sent on a military mission when Abner had come to Hebron. I think that David planned that out. He did not want Joab around when he was talking to Abner for fairly obvious reasons, as we just have seen, okay? But at the same time, he has essentially deceived Joab, okay, in this, which, as you're going to see in a minute, does not go well. So, so Joab returns quickly, and what we see here is that that he is upset. Joab is at David because, number one, the man who spent over 10 years hunting them down is now received with open arms in Hebron. Okay, remember, Abner's been the chief general of Saul and has been on all these campaigns to hunt down David and his men for all those years, at least 10. Secondly, this is the man who, obviously, as we've said, Joab had a blood feud with because of the death of his brother. Okay. And we see that on that basis, he is extremely unhappy. Undoubtedly, Joab feels extremely betrayed by David. Okay. He's furious. And the reason why I know he's furious is that, number one, he's furious that David let Asahel, Joab's brother, just walk out without anything being done to him. That makes him upset, okay? Also, like I said, Abner has been an enemy so long and a general for King Saul so long, and has been a general for King Ishbosheth so long, and therefore, I think understandably, Joab says, he's just here to spy out what you're doing. He's looking for your military strength. He's looking at troops. He's looking at your equipment ability. He's looking at all this stuff. You know, he's scoping out your capital right now. That's what Joab says to him. Now, it's interesting. You don't pick this up in the English. Okay. Let me see. He says, and when he says in verse 24, what have you done? Behold, Abner came to you. Okay. Abner came to you. In the Hebrew, this is a very interesting word. Well, it's a couple words. It has extremely strong sexual connotation. That is, what he's really saying to David is he came to rape you over.
Whoa.
That's what he's saying to him. I mean, you can see by the language in the Hebrew, he is really mad at David about this. Okay. In other words, he's saying also, you know, Abner's come to you in the same way that he came to Saul's concubine Rizpah and had her sexually. Okay. So Joab is brazenly, angrily disrespectful to David in his confrontation. But like you'll see as it goes on, David does not chastise him. And you're going to see why this is the case.
Doesn't chastise
Joab
Joab.
for the way he's speaking to David as king. So Joab realizes that if Abner pulls this off and creates this peace treaty, there's obviously not going to be room in David's army for two top generals.
Right.
Therefore, Joab also undoubtedly thinks Abner's doing this to come for Joab's job as general of David's military. Okay. So he thinks he's gonna be replaced. Now, they, so this, David planned this meeting with Abner without telling Joab. And now you'll see Joab on his own without telling David sends messengers to bring Abner back. i.e., you deceive me, I'll deceive you. Okay? This gets incredibly ugly here. And it's especially ugly because David is their uncle. Remember, Joab is his nephew. Abishai, who's still alive, Joab's other brother, is his nephew. And then there was the one that died, okay? But they're blood related to each other, okay? And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, he plans this out, and he decides to bring Abner back to Hebron. He brings him first to this place called the Well of Sirah. Do you see that? It's in verse 26 at the end of the. We don't know a lot about it. I looked, and the historian Josephus said that it's about 1 to 2 miles just outside of Hebron. Okay, so initially, apparently, they bring him there, but they don't stay there because what it says, if you'll notice, is that verse 27. Then Abner returned to Hebron. Joab took him aside into the middle of the gate. And there he struck him in the belly so that he died. All right. Belly is not quite the correct term in Hebrew. It's really more like the 5th rib. So basically, he stabs him exactly in the place that Abner stabbed his brother. Exactly. Same words in Hebrew. Okay. So now it says that he brings him to Hebron, and then, or outside the well, to the spring well of Sirah, but then takes him to a place, quote, between the inner and outer gate. Now, he does this for a very particular reason. Couple of them, actually. But one of the things you're going to realize is he does this to be sneaky. One, he wants to obviously be in a place where almost no one's going to see him, where he's going to assassinate Abner. But there's another thing about this between the outer and inner gate. And that is that this is a private place, as we said. The significance, of course, is that that number one, technically, he's not, because he's between the outer and the inner gate, he's not technically in the city of Hebron yet. He's in this area between the outer and inner gate. It's actually technically when you get past the inner gate that you're in the city. Now, why do you suppose he does that? I mean, part of it's secrecy, but there's another part of it. What is Hebron? It is one of 6 cities of refuge. Okay.
Think of the word.
Now, in Numbers 35, 22 through 25, it is very clear that when someone has killed someone's relative, the avenger of blood, in Hebrew, the Goel Hadim, is sent out to try to, exact family justice. All right. If the person that killed someone ends up making it to one of the 6 cities of refuge, they have protection. The avenger of blood is not allowed to come inside. He's got to stay outside. Okay. The apparent criminal, all right, is brought inside. The avenger of blood cannot touch him while he's inside the city of refuge. It's absolutely, totally against the Torah law that he be touched. All right. You see why he took him between the inner and the outer gate? Because now he goes, well, I'm not really quite in Hebron, the city of refuge. I'm just outside of it. Okay. Also, I think it's ironic, but probably very purposeful, that traditionally the city gate was where the elders of the town held court to decide justice, decide cases, dispense justice, all right? So he takes him to that place, or very, very close to that place. But interestingly enough, what happens? Joab acts as the jury, the judge, and the executioner all in one. You know, there is no trial by peers, which is what the law and number says. He doesn't get any of that. There's no evidence given. There's no testimony given. It isn't heard by peers. It isn't handled by a group of judges. None of that happens. Joab violates all the Torah law and all this and takes it in his own hands. So, like I said, the cities of refuge were for the protection of the alleged killer until his case was heard. That's why they were set up. Now, also, there's a fourth thing. Abner killed Asahel, okay, Joab's brother. But he killed him in a military conflict after Abner warned him 2 times, don't keep pursuing me. You remember the story?
Mhm.
Okay. Then, when the young man got close enough that he was had practically gotten to him, because remember, he was a fleet runner. That's what's said about him. All right. Once he's about ready, close enough to make a strike, that's when Abner thrusts the pointed end of the spear backwards, going through the 5th rib and killing him. Okay. In the Torah, if you kill someone in a military conflict, that's not murder. Same today, right? If there's a declared war and you kill an enemy combatant in it, you've killed someone, but you haven't murdered them, because it is a approved action of a higher authority to engage in this kind of activity, as tragic as it is. So he also wants revenge on him for an act that does not qualify as murder. But he still obviously thinks it's murder. Joab does. So now Joab also, as a result of this, we'll see, created a monumental political problem by taking justice, quote unquote, into his own hands. That is because he assassinated Abner right there in Hebron. Okay. Abner was supposed to be the broker for peace. And of course, I think David's motivation for trying to engage Abner and allowing this is that the alternative ultimately would be, with 2 kings, eventually a bloody civil war. This is a way to try to negotiate peace, to not have a bloody civil war. But now, the broker of peace and the commander of Ishbosheth's army is assassinated at Hebron, David's city. This really does not go well, all right? And of course, he's now in a position where that he has to try to hurry and find some way to patch this up so that there's a way possibly to make this peace, this treaty work. But Joab's made it really complicated now. Can you imagine what the talk would have been inside the tribe of Benjamin when they hear about this? You know, they're lucky that a war didn't break out right then, at least by the Benjamites as a result of this. Okay, let's read, let's read 20, let's see, 8 through the end. So verse 28, and afterward, when David heard of it, he said, I and my kingdom are innocent before the Lord forever of the blood of Abner, the son of Ner. May it fall on the head of Joab and all his household, and may there not fail from the house of Joab one who has a discharge, or one who is a leper, or who takes hold of a distaff, or who falls by the sword, or who lacks bread. So Joab and Abishai, that is his brother, had killed Abner because he had put their brother Asahel to death in the battle of Gibeon. Verse 31. Then David said to Joab and to all the people who were with him, tear your clothes and gird on sackcloth and lament before Abner. This is not a personal opinion. This is a king ordering it for the people. And he's ordering Joab and his brother to do it too. I'm certain this is making them real happy to have to do this, okay? And it says, and the king, David, walked behind the bier, that is the funeral passage of Abner. And they buried Abner in Hebron, and the king lifted up his voice and wept at the grave of Abner, and all the people wept, and the king chanted a lament for Abner and said, should Abner die as a fool dies? Your hands were not bound, nor your feet put in fetters. As one falls before the wicked, you have fallen. And all the people wept again over him. Then all the people came to persuade David to eat bread while it was still day. But David vowed, saying, may God do so to me, and more also, if I taste bread or anything else before the sun goes down. Now all the people took note of it, and it pleased them, just as everything the king did pleased all the people. So all the people in Israel understood that day that it had not been the will of the king to put Abner, the son of Ner, to death. Then the king said to his servants, do you not know that a prince and a great man has fallen this day in Israel? And I am weak today, though anointed king, and these men, the sons of Zeruiah, that's his sister, okay, are too difficult for me. May the Lord repay the evildoer according to his evil. Now, there's a lot of, I think, interesting stuff in here we're going to look at. Now, David now is in a huge bind on multiple levels. He's in a political bind because now this treaty is in serious question, all right? He's in a bind in terms of how the other tribes are going to look at Abner being killed in Hebron. He also is in a real bind because the two characters that pulled this off and created this mess are his nephews. So he's got a big family problem going on, as well as everything else. And of course, undoubtedly, I think that David is probably furious with Joab that he's created all these problems for him. Now, David goes into full damage control and declares his own innocence in all this matter. He needs to prove dramatically to anyone who's there, okay, and watches that he clearly, as king, did not order this to be done. Okay? He's going to go out of his way to make it clear by his grief and his involvement in a very high-level state funeral that this was not his will that this occurs. Okay? This, of course, he's hoping to sell so that the treaty can come about. All right? So he's making, among other things, a political move here, obviously. Now, interestingly, David publicly states an interesting curse on Joab and his family, okay? Saying that whatever consequences occur by his assassination of Abner is going to fall on him. He says, if you notice in the verse, it would be verse 29. He says, number one, that there's going to be medical discharges that are going to occur by family members, which could in Hebrew mean both menstrual irregularities for a woman or possibly discharge because of gonorrhea or syphilis for the men. that the members of Joab's family are going to suffer from these things. Secondly, he says that leprosy and other skin diseases are going to bother his family members for years and years to come. Third, he says some of the family of Joab will be disabled and will need to help with walking with a crutch. So there's going to be disabled people that are going to be born to them, or disabled maybe but for other means. Fourthly, he says that many family members will die by the sword. Okay? He prophesies, this is a prophecy. He prophesies this is going to happen. Fifthly, interestingly, he says that the members of Joab's family are going to end up suffering a lack of food as a result of this somehow. So he has 5 things that he pronounces an oath and swears a judgment on the house of Joab because of what he's done. Now, verse 30, where he says, so Joab and Abishai, his brother, killed Abner because he had put their brother to death at the Battle of Gibeon. The grammar here in the Hebrew is kind of interesting, the structure of it, because what it does in the Hebrew is it emphasizes a comparison. It says that Azael's death, in the Hebrew, the word death for Azael is the word mut. Okay? It means to die as a result of an event, i.e. a battle. Okay? But it says that Abner's death by the 2 nephews is harag. Harag means premeditated murder. So he's, in the Hebrew, he's comparing and contrasting the 2 different types of death here. Now, David begins his public damage control by ordering everyone in Hebron to put on mourning or funeral clothing and to start to lament the death of Abner. And of course, as the funeral procession actually begins, David is now walking directly behind the funeral bier as it's being moved to the place of burial, as again, a further evidence that he laments the loss of Abner in this, that he didn't cause it. Now, it's interesting that David also, it says, is weeping at the burial site. Now, it begs to me a question. Was he really all that upset about the death of Abner?
No, he's probably upset at Joab.
He's extremely upset at Joab, there's no question, and Abishai. I think it's hard to say how upset David is. You know, as we go on, we see that he laments because he says that Abner was a great military man. I think that he could lament in a genuine way to some extent. He's known Abner since he was hardly beyond the age where he killed Goliath. He was in Saul's court with him for a number of years. He obviously must have served on the battlefield with him and all the battle engagements that David had in Saul's army. You know, obviously he's known him for a long time, and I think it probably is fair to say that even though there's plenty of things he didn't like about Abner, like chasing him for 10 years' time, okay, at the same time he saw him as an effective but probably ruthless military commander. So, I mean, I think he respected that Abner was good at what he did,
But
probably.
He scolded Abner one time when
He did,
Saul was sleeping.
Yep.
He got his spear.
that's right, and the water bottle correctly. So, even though he was a powerful adversary, like I said, I think in a certain sense he did respect him. And he wants to make a big point publicly that he did not approve of this assassination. It was an execution. Exactly. Now, David says in verses 33 and 34 that Abner, you see it's a little poetic verse, okay? Abner, should Abner die as a fool dies, your hands were not bound or your feet put in fetters, and as one falls before the wicked, you have fallen. What he's saying there in essence is that he didn't die like a criminal with his hands and feet tied up like someone you would hang or something like that. He died standing up. He died as a military man. He died as a political figure. In other words, he didn't have a shameful death, is what he's really saying in that. He was a respectable man in that sense. So we also see that David, as a result, fasts during this day. He will not eat food to, again, further demonstrate his quote unquote upset. And notice what it says. In all these things that David did, quote, it pleased the people. In other words, even if part of this was political show, he did a good job of it in the political theater because apparently he sold it and the people believed it. And of course, they saw that he was grieved at this great man, this great leader being assassinated. Now, it's interesting, I think, about the long-term consequences of Joab's murder, because I think they're very interesting. I want to show you something, a couple things. First, I want you to turn to 1 Kings 2. So turn to your right to 1 Kings chapter 2. And we're going to read verses 5 and 6. This is David talking to Solomon just before David dies and goes to be with the Lord, okay? Notice in verse 2, I'm going the way of all the earth, be strong therefore and show yourself a man, 4 and 5, he says, so that the Lord may carry out his promise, which he's spoken of concerning me, saying, well, he's admonishing him to follow the ways of the Lord. Then he says in 5, he says, now you also know what Joab the son of Zeruiah did to me, what he did to the two commanders of the armies, to Abner the son of Ner and to Amasa the son of Jether, whom he killed. So Joab not only assassinated Abner, but there's another commander in David's army that he also killed named Amasa. Okay, so he arbitrarily assassinated both of them. And he says, whom he killed, and he also shed the blood of war and peace. And he says, and he put the blood of war on his belt, about his waist, and on the sandals in his feet. So act accordingly to your wisdom. Notice what he says to his son. Do not let his gray hair go down to Sheol in peace. What's he telling Solomon?
Take care of Joab.
Exactly. He says, when you take over kingdom, kill him. He's killed lots of people. He's done a lot of problems. He's created misery for me. Kill him. And of course, that's exactly what happens. That Solomon then appoints this guy named Barzillai, and of course he sends him to go kill Abner. Abner flees to the tabernacle, to the altar, and the two horns of the altar, the bronze altar, assuming that in the tabernacle he'll be safe, that they would never dare kill him in the tabernacle. And Solomon says to him, kill him anyway. So kill him right there. All right. It's interesting also, he says, verse 9 of that chapter, so now therefore do not let him go unpunished, for you are a wise man, Solomon, and you will know what you ought to do to him, and you shall bring his gray hair down to Sheol with blood. So he's very clear that Joab has been a liability in many ways for David for a long period of time, and he's telling Solomon, get rid of him because he'll create as many problems for you as he's created for me. So therefore, it is a direct result, obviously, of Joab's assassination of Abner that he's going to end up getting assassinated too. Okay? Now, also, secondly, as I said, He kills him because of they're seeking, Solomon's going to seek revenge on Joab for killing these two generals, as we just talked about. And also, we see that a third thing happens that's going to end up in the death of Joab. I want you to turn, if you were, to 2 Kings 2. From 1 Kings, go to 2 Kings. And we're going to go to chapter 2 of 2 Kings. And we're going to read okay. I think I made a mistake. No, apparently I wrote that down.
That's about Elijah.
No, let me look again. Just a second. I just wrote it down wrong. 2 Kings 2, there isn't. So at any rate, what it says there is that it's a historical comment. Sorry, I wrote it down wrong. I'll find it. But where it says that Joab, after he was killed by this assassin that Solomon sent, didn't have an honorary funeral, but he was literally sent and put in, well, it was probably a marked grave, but it was, in other words, he died like a common, he was buried like a common man. Okay? It's another result of what he'd done. Now, the killing of Abner by Joab also had many other far-reaching events and results that were connected to it. And of course, one of the things that we'll see, well, I think we're going to see, is that as time goes on, when Solomon dies, the kingdom splits, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have the north called Israel and the south called Judah, and there's a king in the north and a king in the south. Well, what you learn as you go through the history, the narrative, is that one of the big reasons why the kingdom split is because of feuds between the family because of the Joab incident. And therefore, these things carried on for years and years and years. And when it came to the time to replace Solomon, they were so split. The Davidic family was so split that the kingdom split in half. It goes back to a lot of stuff that Joab did. So there's really far-reaching consequences in Israel for what he's done. Now, in verse 34, back in our text in 2 Samuel 3, I'm sorry, it's not verse 34. I want to look at verse 39. Verse 39, I find to be an extremely interesting verse in the Hebrew. It says in the English, I'll read it again, and I am weak today, though anointed king, and these men, the sons of Zeruiah, are too difficult for me. May the Lord repay the evildoer according to his evil. This really does not encompass very well what the Hebrew says. So I'm going to break it down for you some in the Hebrew, okay? The word weak, when he says that, I am weak, it's the word orak in Hebrew, and it means to be delicate, soft, weak, especially weakness of character. That is, what he's saying is that he has the authority of the king and total power, and yet he finds that he doesn't know what to do about this. He's in a quandary about what to do, and he admits that he's weak of character, that he isn't definitive about it. Okay? Then it says about his nephews, it says they are, quote, too hard. Do you see it there? Too hard. This is the Hebrew keshah. It means cruel, hard-hearted, obstinate, stiff-necked. And he talks about their evil. You see also that word there at the end. It's the word ro or raw. It means wicked, nasty, violent, and interestingly enough, I find this interesting at least, it is the very same word that is described of the behavior of the Nephilim in Genesis 6, verse 5.
Could you say that again, please?
All right. This word that David uses to describe his nephews, okay? He says the Ra or evil, all right? It is the very same word that is used in Genesis chapter 6, verse 5 of the nature of the Nephilim. In other words, what it's telling you, these guys are absolutely, totally, violently out of control. But there's nephews, and he's not quite certain how to effectively corral them. That's basically what he's saying. So he doesn't know what to do. See, he admits that. He says, you're too difficult for me. May the Lord repay the evildoer according to his. He literally just defers and says, God will have to figure out the consequences for this because I just can't decide. I can't sort it out. Now, they are ruthless. This chapter is about revenge. The ruthless man is effective, but brings along with him tons of baggage and tons of collateral damage. Okay? It always happens. Turn, if you would, over to the right to Proverbs 11. Proverbs chapter 11. A very interesting set of verses. We're going to start in verse 16 about the ruthless man. Okay? It says, a gracious woman attains honor, and the violent, there's the word again, ruthless, violent, out of control, cruel. The violent man will attain riches. Like I said, he's effective, but he can't be controlled by anyone. Okay? Verse 17, the merciful man does himself good. But again, the same word, idea, the cruel man does himself harm. In other words, he's going to end up having problems. You can't act cruel and wicked and do these things and not stir up enemies by the score. And that's, of course, what happens. The cruel man does himself harm. The wicked earns deceptive wages. In other words, he makes gain, but through illegal means. But he who sows righteousness gets a true reward. He who is steadfast in righteousness will attain life, and he who pursues evil will bring about his own what? Death. What happens to Joab? Okay? They end up being killed because God says, if you're that kind of person, you may succeed for a while in your cruelty, but your end will come. And someone potentially more cruel than you will finally do you in. Okay? Also, I think it also says 20 also, he says, the perverse in heart are an abomination to the Lord. You see, just like they are an abomination to David here, but the blameless in their walk are his delight. Assuredly, the evil man will not go unpunished, but the descendants of the righteous will be delivered. So he contrasts the righteous versus the evil man here in Proverbs. I think it's a good verse to understand what's going on here. Now, question. What do we learn from this chapter? Let me give you 4 things, and maybe you can think of more than 4 things. but 4 come to my mind that we learn from this chapter. Number 1, deceit and dishonesty lead to eventual big problems. David was not honest with Joab, so Joab turns around and is not honest with David. And all this starts to roll downhill in a bad way, okay? Secondly, relatives in authority of a regime or business or church often create big problems. If you haven't seen it, I will be amazed for you to tell me you've never seen it, because it happens all the time. You know, how many men who were spiritually competent, capable, excellent, had sons who end up trying to take over their ministry, and 9 out of 10 times what happens?
Collapses.
Yeah, well, they don't have the character of their father. Okay, they take over, but they're not qualified to. We just saw this in Thomas Road Baptist Church in the last, 2 months? Okay, you know what happened? No? Well, come on, pastor that years ago talked about the moral majority.
Yeah. I
What?
know who you're
His
talking
name
about.
just escaped me. I can't believe that.
Jerry
Uh,
Falwell.
Jerry Falwell, okay. Well, Falwell, of course, died, okay?
Ellie's kid took over.
Yeah, and his one son took over as the leader of the church, and of course, also was on the board at Liberty University. Both those, okay? Did you read what happened in the last 2 months? Well, apparently, I'm gonna say this, it's not very pleasant, but apparently it was discovered that the Falwell son and his wife were having a menage a trois with, I think it was the pool boy.
Yeah, I read.
I think it was the pool boy that took care of their grounds. Really wonderful, okay?
That isn't everything.
Yeah, I don't even, what else happened? I don't, you know?
Yeah, he was a severe alcoholic. He had
Oh, okay.
stopped.
Okay.
And he's addicted to drugs.
I think I did hear that, yeah.
So when you add those things all up, the board of directors of Liberty threw him out.
Yes, properly so. Properly so. But again, that's just a recent example. But it's happened in organizations over and over and over and over again. Okay? Third thing I think we can learn from this. Seeking revenge always leads to more revenge and starts a cycle of revenge that is extremely difficult to stop. This is part of why God says, vengeance is mine, says the Lord, I will repay. Okay? He will create some system at some point of justice. Okay? But he tells us not to take our own revenge, even though it's extremely tempting to do so in our human nature, without question. Fourthly, seeking political alliances often backfires, causing untold misery. What's one of the great examples in what we're reading now? Political marriages.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? They marry all these daughters of all these kings, okay? And what happens is many of them are foreign women who bring their foreign gods, and therefore they lead Israel away from the Lord by doing all of this. There's many, many other, but political consequences become very, very sticky. And, for instance, why is it, I mean, there's several reasons why Solomon ends up being king over all his brothers, okay? But one of the reasons is because if you read the story, we'll get there, Bathsheba is behind all the political movements to get him installed.
Yeah, she is.
She's making her political moves left and right, okay, to get this guy in this place, We watched a movie last night that was quite interesting, all right? And it was about this girl who, actually, was this actually, it was a true story, actually, wasn't it? It actually happened. I think it was. Any rate, it was in the years ago, like in the 80s or something like this, there was a school shooting that went on. It was, many kids died. It was a private school. And this one woman, okay, who was a student at that time, survived. Okay, a couple others survived too, but a lot of them were killed. It was fellow students that killed all these people. The reason why this girl was in that school is because her mother was determined that this girl was going to go to a prestigious school. She was going to hobnob and share elbows with all these kids of prestigious families of great pedigree so she could get into a prestigious college so she could become a wealthy, well-married woman. That's what it was about. And this mother practically ruined her daughter's life in multiple ways. Happens all the time, you know, the rich and famous. So, it's interesting. Let me close with another proverb. It's an interesting one. Since you're in Proverbs 11, go to Proverbs 14. This is a kind of an enigmatic proverb that you, again, have to look in the Hebrew to really get it. Okay? It's Proverbs 14:4. Now, let me read 1, 2, and 3 because it really gives you the context, and then we'll read 4. Okay? The wise woman builds her house, but the foolish tears it down with her own hands. That, you know, those movements, sometimes political movements, you know, etc. Verse 2, he who walks in uprightness fears the Lord, and he who is crooked in his ways despises him. 3, in the mouth of the foolish is a rod for his back, but the lips of the wise will preserve them. So he's talking about certain types of behavior and certain types of people, right? Then verse 4, which seems kind of like an enigma, where no oxen where no oxen are, the manger is clean, but much increase comes by the strength of the ox.
Yeah, it's kind of confusing.
Now, when you put that in the context of the first 3 verses, you go, why is he talking about oxen and a manger, a feeding trough, when he's just been talking about contrasting the righteous versus the evil? Well, let me show you a couple words, okay? There is the word crib, obviously, or manger, is the word ibus. It's a feeding trough. And it says that, there that where the manger is clean, okay? It means, is the word bar, and it means morally pure, clean, and having that character ability. It says then, notice in verse 4, it says, but much increase comes by the strength of the ox. The word strength there is koach. I think that's how it's pronounced, koach. It means the ability to accomplish something. That is, what it's saying is that the point is that when no oxen work, the place is stable and uncluttered and clean. It's calm, as it were. It says, but oxen working brings all type of disorder, mess, and discord. That is, what he's really using is an analogy. The working oxen are people that are striving at a goal, which create upheaval, discord, and a mess. Okay? These are his nephews. They're men that act this way. And David now is embroiled because of his oxen into a huge, complicated mess. Okay?
There are many examples in history like that,
There were many.
where children or relatives would create a huge mess.
Right.
In a kingdom.
Yeah. When strong people act, sometimes they do it on the basis of character and it's good, but a lot of times strong people act that don't have character and it leads to these oxen who mess everything up. They brutishly go around and destroy things. That's really the image that's being used here. So,
Well, power. People will do anything to seek power.
or money.
Mhm.
And like Norman has often said, these things happen over and over and over again. Why, Norm? Because of
You can't fix stupid.
because of human behavior,
You can't fix stupid. It just
human
doesn't-
character, human frailty. That's why history seems to repeat itself. So, all right, that's that chapter. Next week we'll move on. Ann, would you close us with prayer tonight?
Lord, as we look at kings, David, Solomon, Saul, we see their strengths, their weaknesses, and it's just like us. We have strengths, we have
Yes.
weaknesses, and without the Lord, we mess everything up. And Lord, we just are so grateful for your word and how you show us that following your commandments, following you is the only way to go. And as they did that, they succeeded. When they didn't, they failed.
Yes.
And Lord, be with each one of us that we can take these examples from your word, gain from them, apply them to our own lives, that we too can be strong in you, doing your will day by day. Thank you, Lord, for who you are
Yes.
and what you are to each of us here. Thank you, Lord, for Michael's wonderful recovery.
Yes.
We're just so pleased that he's here, he's breathing,